No.
Welcome to the Simsbury Free Library. We're really excited to have Luke Villani here to give a talk on the Climax Fuse Company in Avon. Before I go on to introduce Luke a little bit, I did leave a note on everybody's chairs about upcoming events we have, and we have one of our speakers here for next week, Josh Cole, who is going to be doing a talk on his time with Katie Hitson and some other 10 or so other teenagers in France, storing trenches in France, in Simsbury, France, which is a 3-week trip. It sounds so amazing. Please, please come. I can't wait to hear more about it. It's fascinating. And the things that they could just bring back is amazing, are amazing. So there's that. So here we have Luke. Welcome, Luke. Luke did some research here over how many years?
2.
2 years. He was doing research using some of our archives, doing it with, I think with Alan with you, right? He was you're working together with Alan from the Simsbury Historical Society. And so yeah, he's here to present his findings. He is a junior at UConn majoring in history. He was recently voted to the Student Senate, and he's going to be doing focusing on historical appreciation and preservation. And he also just got an idea grant to work on doing digs around Simsbury in particular, and maybe other places. So please welcome Luke.
Okay. Hello. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I'm amazed so many people came. You know, when I first started researching Climax Fuse, there was almost no one to go to talk about it, and I'm really glad that you're all very interested. Yep. How many of you have seen the buildings over that are the Town Hall of Avon? Raise your hand. Yep. So that is Climax Fuse. And basically, so Climax Fuse has a long history, and we're going to go into it. But first, let's start with what came before Climax Fuse. So before Safety Fuse, most projects that required explosives and such used quill fuses, which basically involved putting black powder into a feather and lining them up and then detonating them. And of course, that has a lot of issues, you know. They're going to blow up. They're going to be inaccurately timed. It's really just unsafe in every single way. And especially, you know, I listed some pre-safety fuse projects here, like the Erie Canal. I think many of us who have taken American history know about a lot of the death that happened with the construction of that. A lot of Irish workers who came over. And, you know, it was just a regular occurrence with these pre-safety fuse products. So William Bickford, in 1836, created safety fuse, which basically started as a rod of sorts. And he was from England. Toy Bickford and Company, which is the predecessor to Ensign Bickford, brought over his patents and his fuse technology. And that is how, you know, they were able to bring safety fuse to America. Safety fuse is called safety fuse because it's a lot safer than its predecessors. It was created for proper detonation time by length. So if, let's say I have a foot of fuse, if it's listed that a foot of fuse is going to be 1 minute and I light that, then in 1 minute that dynamite's going to blow up. So this allowed for to fix a lot of the issues with construction projects, mining. Even, you know, I've seen advertisements actually from the older papers where people were buying safety fuse for farmers. They were advertising the farmers to blow up stumps in their fields. So it became the standard almost instantly, and it came to America, and it's been used in many things. Even today, we use a lot of safety fuses like fireworks and such. So, oh, I kind of got into that actually a little early. Yep, so precise timing. Safety fuse itself is rope that's been winded together with black powder and then covered with a tar finish. The tar finish was to protect it from weather damage and such, because when you're trying to blow up things in the rain, you don't want your fuse not working, and because water can contaminate black powder and then make it basically unusable. So safety fuse is made through a pretty standard process. It hasn't changed too much, or it didn't change too much until about the 50s with detonation fuses and such. But so basically, for our purposes, I'm going to talk about before this era. So there were three major steps. The winding of the fuse, which often, as I said, required bending together rope and black powder in a controlled environment to wrap the black powder so you have it as a contained fuse. Then you had the tarring, and that's to coat it, protect it. And then the most important part of fuse making, probably, and it's because it makes safety fuse safe, is the length cutting, because you don't want the issues of the quill fuse, as the quill fuse would often not have the right time measurements. With a quill fuse, you set it off, you don't know when that's going off. With safety fuse, they cut it a length, and that's the measurement of the time for that length. These are actually some sketches I found at the Avon Public Library, supposedly of machinery that was at Climax Fuse Company during its operations. If you ever want to see real existing equipment to make fuse, Simsbury Historical Society has a very nice exhibit on it. Yes, and I would definitely recommend seeing it if you're really interested in the industry. So before we get to Climax Fuse, we have to talk about Climax Fuse's predecessor, R. Andrews and Sons, which was also was a fuse company based in Avon. It was created by Romeo Andrews, who passed away before it fell, leaving it to his sons. It was formed by not only the Andrews family, but also by sons of Bacon, Bacon is a family that's very strong in the early Toy Bickford company. And so these individuals wanted to split off, make their own company, and find their own wealth. And they left with workers and basically founded this company. And they competed for 18 years until they went defunct. So Albert F. Andrews, who is Romeo's son, decided to create this new Climax Fuse company with Harry Chapman, who was, so the agreement was Albert would serve as the president and Chapman would serve as the treasurer. There was also a secretary, who I'll be getting to in a later slide. And it was basically the dominant force industry for Avon, because before Climax Fuse or the previous company, there was really no major manufacturing in Avon. What Climax Fuse did was develop a proper factory structure that, like what Ensign Bickford did for Simsbury, making it into a factory town essentially toward like about 100 years ago, that Climax Fuse did for Avon, modernizing the town and such. And it, of course, continued to compete with Ensign Bickford.
Excuse me, the slide before, is that water?
Here?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, this is the, and I'll be talking about this a little later on, but so Climax fuse, a lot of its power came from water. This is the Climax pond, basically, and essentially with mill factories, they have to have a controlled body of water so they can have a constant flow and speed. So as to generate the power to work the machinery, a lot of this, because this is pre-electrical for the most part, these machines. This is basically water power mills, and it's very similar to what you'll have in Lowell. In Simsbury, there have definitely been a long history of mill creation, even our sawmill here today. If you ever want to see what a proper mill pond looks like right there in front of it. I was kind of looking for a mill actually for my project today. So I got firsthand experience of wading through a pond. This pond? So this pond, I believe, and I've been looking for maps about Climax fuse for a very long time. And I've been and this has been one of the issues I've been having. I believe the remnants are the pond that's across from the fuse company.
Step pond.
Yep, step pond. Yep. Or possibly there was one lower, but I doubt it just because when you have a mill, you want to have the mill be on a graduate slope, because you want the water to flow downward so it creates more energy, and because that's how you operate your machinery. So around 1892, Ensign Bickford, their leadership at least, basically took over Climax Fuse. They outright bought all the shares, but they kept it separate. That was a major thing to keep in mind. They kept all the workers on board, and they invested some money into development, though they did not like developing a lot, because, I'll be talking about some of the conflicts between what workers wanted for this company and what the leadership did very soon. So back to what the factory power sources. So this is a picture I took this weekend, actually. I went over there to get this. So you can still find remnants at Climax Fuse of the mill streams. And as I was saying, these are basically the means of providing the water for the mills so they can operate proper. This is the main bridge over the pond. This was like the dam, basically, actually, I should say, that would control the flow of water from the pond into the other portions. This is around, I think this picture is like 1890s, I want to say. And like multiple Climax fuse structures, it's made of wood. That was actually a very common theme, as we'll see with architecture from this company. And it had some bad results, to say the least. So the workers of Climax Fuse, basically, they tried originally with R. Andrews and Sons. They wanted to have locals work the factories, but Avon, as many of us know, is not the largest town, and especially was not a large town back then. We're talking about an agricultural economy. It's basically a break-off of Farmington, if I'm getting my older Avon history correct. Yes. And it's, there's just not the proper amount of people to work a factory that has to produce a certain amount of fuse to meet its clientele's desires. So, like Ensign Bickford did around this period as well, following suit, Climax Fuse hired a lot of immigrants, especially from Italy, Poland, Russia, and Germany. And also I've seen immigrants' names from Ireland and other parts of Europe. And yeah, there's a lot of immigration here this is really the age of immigration to this country. These people are seeking a better life during this time period. And this was a means for them to escape the problematic lifestyle that was New York City at this time, escaping the ghettos and finding real work outside of the city in these smaller communities. This was like a chain of events that occurred during this period, during the Industrial Revolution, where these small towns would develop and import the workers so they can provide the goods. So workers were paid $1.75 a day for a 12-hour workday. And I did the math, and it's $4.12 an hour today in today's money. So we have an issue, a lot of people have an issue getting by with $7 today. I don't understand how people could even live on $4. And especially when I get to the cost of living on here.
How many days a week?
Oh, 5 to 6. I've seen variance on the time scales, but the average was about 5 to 6, and yeah, 12 hours a day, as I said, and that's for most workers at least. So, worker housing and livelihood. Now, this is a picture I took of the remnants of the Ensign Bickford housing, which is much more modern than Climax Fuse, but it's just to really give an example. Frank Hadsell, who was part of management for Climax Fuse around 1900, 1901, in his diaries, he wrote that he was basically pushing for the leadership to construct new housing because there was a major housing crisis. Many of the locals working in these factories actually lived in boarding houses for some time. And then when you introduce an abundance of factory workers from other countries, you need a place for them to live. So the solution was to make tenements. And this has been done in multiple countries during this period. It was a means to provide the workers just the necessity to live so they can basically work in your factory. And Frank Hadsell described the houses that they constructed actually as very similar to the Ensign Bickford ones. And he actually personally drew a house plan for this company. And he described them as better than small, contracted, chubby box houses. And even these houses, the Climax Fuse top brass were very hesitant to build. They were not very interested in developing a lot of Climax Fuse when they didn't have to. And a lot of people in management saw this as an unnecessary cost. But overall, the workers prevailed in this sense, and that was brought for them. And then you have a high cost of living. So Clinton Hadsell, another worker, who actually was paid a little more than most workers, had his costs. He wrote down his costs of living, actually. We have at Avon Public Library his accounts for the years around this period. And as I wrote here, they're charging in this time period's currency. So keep in mind, people are making $1.75 a day at this factory. They're charging soda in Avon $4.20. So that's basically a 2 to 3 work days of money for a soda. And for boarding, you're talking about $17.10 when the average person monthly is making probably around $30 a month. So obviously there's a major issue between cost and earning here. And yeah, it really just shows the issues with the system for the workers themselves. And then, during this period, it was very common for women to be in the workplace with factories. And this would change later on during the Victorian era, or after the Victorian era, I should say. But so these are some workers from the Climax Fuse Company. Many of them were foreigners, and they were basically preferred over men because they could work cheaper. And in many factories, I'm not sure if this really relates to Climax Fuse, but they had smaller hands and could fit their hands in machinery, like children as well. And I believe there were some children employed at Climax Fuse. Usually the age to begin work at this period, even in factories, was 14. And women definitely played a part in the advancement of this company. And even, in Ensign Bickford as well. And with Ensign Bickford, they actually had a women's club for the workforce. And that kind of came to Avon later on down the road as well. So worker recreation, these people, they're working and they need to blow off some steam. So there was a lot of interesting recreational activities around Avon Climax Fuse that we know about. So I included 2 photos here. So this is, so gambling was a big one. Gambling, drinking, smoking, and also skinny dipping in the Climax pond. Yes. And, really, there needed to be they had 1 day off, 1 to 2 days off a week. And also, they only worked 12 hours of the 24-hour day. So they would find the time to do these activities. Clinton Hadsell, who actually photographed most of these photos, bought a camera with his earnings and used that as his recreation. We don't know too much about many of the workers just because they didn't keep too many diaries. Most of the diaries that we have available to us and in the present day are from a lot of the locals who worked here. And that's, I believe, personally, because a lot of these foreigners did not always speak English and they couldn't write English. And that's why, or they couldn't write at all in some cases. Like, you had certain countries they were coming from that didn't have proper education systems. And so we really just don't know much about the workers themselves in a lot of these senses, other than these photographs that we have available. So, working families. It was very common during this period for multiple family members to work at the same company. I selected 2 families here I want to talk about. So the McCarthys, there were, I believe, 8 McCarthys working at this factory during around 1910, and they worked in all different lines, and they were male and female. So your daughters, your sons, they would all be working in the factory with you as well. And then the Hadsells were a local family. They had a little debt issues because their father had moved on, like he moved to New York and remarried. But so they basically, they used Climax Fuse as a means to afford their living. And 3 brothers of, I believe, 6 siblings. I just want to make sure I have that right. Yeah. 6 siblings worked in this factory. Clinton Hadsell was an inspector of fuse to make sure for the coils. I believe Frank Hadsell served in management, and Will Hadsell was on the floor, more or less. They all earned, most of them, Clinton and Frank at least, earned a lot more than a lot of your average Joes at this factory. But they, it just shows how families would really rely on this as a means to live, when, especially in a town like Avon, where this is the only industry that really exists other than agriculture. This is the way for families who either lost their fathers or both parents to continue to earn a living and support each other. And now we come to the most, I would say, well-known aspect of the Climax Fuse Company, which is the fire. So, yeah, and this is an article from the Hartford Courant, actually. So in September 15th, 1905, James Joyce, who was more or less just a floor worker at this company, was cleaning up after the workday was over. Many people were leaving the company, or not leaving the company, but leaving for the day. And basically, he used a hot iron to clean black powder, and I believe we all know what happens when you heat up black powder. Yeah, it was just a huge mess. It instantly killed him right away. He caught fire. Many people were trapped in the building. Climax Fuse would not, per se, meet the safety standards that are required of today. As I said before, a lot of these structures were wooden, or they were stone, had stone exteriors, but a lot of wooden interiors. They weren't developed to prevent a fire. There was just no safety measures. Frank Hadsell actually, in his diary, blamed a lot of the issues on the Ensign Bickford leadership for not providing proper safety measures for these incidents, especially since I believe there had been previous incidents also at Ensign Bickford very similar to this prior to this date. And this basically led to the destruction of the old works. So a lot of the photos I've been showing you, those structures are no longer existent. You will not find anything from the old works. Nothing survived. This was the destruction of Climax Fuse. So for first respondents, Dr. Tanner, who lived, I believe, across the street from Climax Fuse Company, was the first responder of 6 doctors who came to assist in the efforts to make this issue not as bad as it was. You know, dealing with the injured and the sick and the dying, and possibly identifying the dead somewhat, if they could even recover the bodies. So his home was basically turned into a makeshift infirmary. There were countless people who had been injured in this. At least I've counted 27 casualties, both injured and dead. And so for many people, this was it became a panic zone also, because while these people were trying to respond to this issue, there was no police to facilitate any kind of order, and multiple families who, you know, of course, had multiple loved ones in many cases in this factory, were in a panic trying to figure out if their fellow family members had survived, if they had been injured. And there was just no policy in place to prevent any major issues with this. And it just became a major hassle where they were interfering with doctors' work. It was just a huge issue. And then many of the people who had gained huge burns, because this was like a massive fire, and some people were burned their whole body and wrapped in bandages. Those people who had the fortune of surviving compared to the dead were basically brought into the hospital within a day's time of this. And because of the Hartford Hospital, which is now I believe owned by Hartford Healthcare, and you can actually go see that there today. They basically took care of these people and made sure there weren't even more casualties than there would have been. So 15 people died in this fire. And the McCarthys faced the largest loss. 3 of the siblings died, and their father had died the previous year, I'm pretty sure. And so this was a huge loss, of 8 people. 3 of their family members had passed away in one instant, just like that, And then you had, of course, James Joyce, who caused this whole incident. And the Canfields, Mr. Canfield was a father, and I believe he had about 6 children or so. And he passed away in the fire, leaving them orphaned and his wife basically a widow. And as I said before, eyewitnesses described the panic, and in the papers, you can look these up. I've seen many accounts through the newspapers, which are really a great record of this incident, and they are describing complete anarchy with this situation. There was no control whatsoever. 12 people were injured in this fire with extensive burns. The original recording was 7 people, and the rest of the dead died after this fire, just from the burns alone. It was a very extensive casualty count, and the recovery was not good for this company whatsoever. So basically, when your whole factory gets destroyed, you have to rebuild all your structures and everything. They began the process 2 years after the fuse fire. They looked at Ensign Bickford structures. So if you ever drive by Ensign Bickford, you'll see they have very tightly packed brick structures made to withstand explosions, which are made for fire resistance. They prevent fires from spreading to multiple buildings, which Climax Fuse did not, and that's why they lost almost every single building in that fire. Just a lot of safety measures to prevent this from ever happening. As you can imagine, a lot of workers were pretty traumatized from this, and they wanted to make a safe environment for them to come work again at their factory. So 13 structures were planned to be built. The cost was around $61,000, which was a lot of money back then. And this was a major cost for people in the leadership who did not want to pay a dime for this factory, but were forced to just by this incident. And then Miss Wood, Miss Antoinette Eno Wood of Simsbury, helped very much in the relief effort. She distributed multiple funds to families, the Canfield family, with actually 8 orphans, I should correct myself. So she gave $100 to them, and multiple other families, the widow of James Joyce, the McCarthys. She was very helpful in their need, and basically her efforts paid for their livelihood. Many of them I've seen, based off the report from her distributor of funds, list them as moving away to like Hartford and such, because they had to find apartments, especially because they could not afford to live in a factory town without a factory. And so her funds really helped to pay for their food and livelihood after this incident. So when you put a lot of money into a company that you didn't want to put money into, what do? You basically make it into your actual company. And so the leadership, Ensign and all the others, they decided that it was time that Climax fuse be brought into the fold. And they wrote up this merger document around 1907. So they rebuilt these factories because they wanted them to function as factories. And now they would be functioning as Ensign Bickford structures. So Climax Fuse ended in 1907 through that merger and became Ensign Bickford. So the current Ensign Bickford today is a combination of Ensign Bickford and Climax Fuse. It actually had a name change during this process to solidify that relationship. It produced fuse for many decades after the incident, after the fire and the merger. They would produce a lot of other products such as Caprinol and other things. Cuprinol, sorry. Yeah, never heard that word, really. So I have a photo of that product. And so this is also a document basically declaring that Ensign Bickford's operations in Avon are really, patriotic and, good for the people. And it really falls in line with a lot of the corporate advertising of the 50s. Ensign Bickford would own this company and the current structures, which are the town hall, till around the latter 20th century. Or mostly, I believe, like the 70s and 80s. I don't do too much research in this portion, so I'm not really sure about that precise date. But they did close the factory, as we know, and it's the town hall today. So Climax Fuse today, you can see a lot of legacy from the rebuilding. So as I said, these are the tenements from the Ensign Bickford era. You have the water canal, water streams, the mill streams for the factories. As you can see here, this is one of the structures. And in that photo, you can see on the far right, the chimneys or the hoods for this factory are still present today. You walk around there, and you can see many, many legacy aspects of the company. Though, unfortunately, I wasn't able to get a precise photo because it's changed enough that you cannot, or at least I cannot, identify where precisely each building was. It's one of my efforts, though, in the long run. And yeah, I definitely desire to figure out where everything is and what each building served as. And with that, I'm done. If anyone has any questions. Yeah.
How did you get started? Why did you choose the Climax Fuse?
So I started, I would say, becoming a historian when I was in my senior year of high school, so around 4 years ago. And I started that by becoming an intern at Simsbury Historical Society. And the first task they gave me was to find out more about Climax Fuse Company because Simsbury Historical Society didn't have a lot of information on it. And it is really a part of Ensign Bickford, and I was an Avon resident at the time. And I was very happy to do this research. It was very exciting for me. I got to do a lot of work with the Avon Public Library, the Simsbury Free Library, which has a lot of the company documents below us actually right now. And it was just a great activity, and I'm planning on doing future things with it, possibly writing a paper or two on it.
Your PhD thesis.
Yeah, maybe.
I was an artist at the Farnham Valley Art Center, which is in the Fuse Assembly
Yeah.
Company, and has two floors, and each studio, each room was separated, and so it lent itself to being an art center quite well enough. And they said that the roof was on loosely, so that if there was an explosion, it would release it and have less damage. And that each each room, which is a single room along this walkway, 2 floors, is where they assembled the fuses. And they had chutes coming down from the 2nd floor to the 3rd floor. Now, when did that stop being assembly of fuses, and in what year, do you know?
I'm not too sure when they stopped fuse production, but yeah, very, you know, the aspect you were talking about with the roofs, that's basically what I was trying to mention with I should have mentioned with how Ensign Bickford, when they redid this portion of the company, they made it very similar to Ensign Bickford in Simsbury. And one of those aspects was to make the roofs blast off in case of an explosion. So rather than with the Avon Climax fuse fire, which spread, you would have the more of the fire go upward rather than sideways. Yeah.
They had more stone in the structure.
And yes.
And it was, I think it was quarried across the river, the stone there that they used.
Yeah. Yes.
Do you have any idea what happened to the workers after the fire and before they rebuilt? And also, have you made any effort to find out the descendants of the people that worked in the Climax Fuse Company? How many of them are still in the area?
So I have not had a chance to do the genealogy, though I am planning on working on it and finding out where each of the workers came from in their homelands and where and how their descendants live today. But that's a very good question. So after this fuse fire, as I was saying before, a lot of the at least family members of the victims, they moved away. Many of them were afraid to work in this factory again. Right after this, right after this fuse fire, there was, you did not see any employment. The books just stopped for most of the workforce, and that was due to the factory being burnt down, but also just people not wanting to come to work anymore, and so. Some people, they did stay around. I know I was able to find pictures of and identify people. If you look in the books, there's a few families who stayed in the area and went back to work. Many of them sought work in other locations. With this report from Miss Wood and Mrs. Wood and the distribution of the funds, there's a lot of evidence that they moved to Hartford or neighboring towns. The Canfield children, whose father died in this fire, they went to live with Reverend Lillian Lumen of, sorry, wrong line. Reverend J.E. Clark of Collinsville. And he basically took all 8 children under his wing. Yeah. Are there any other questions?
Yeah,
Yes.
do you know how many employees they had when the fire occurred?
Oh, I believe it's around 50.
50, so they lost 27 out of 50?
Yeah, well, 15 died, 12 were injured. But yeah, yeah, essentially, yeah, about half.
The Art Center to get a real feeling of what it was like, because it's just right there.
Yeah.
Walkway and just single rooms where they assemble the fuses.
Yeah, it's really hard, I think, for us. Like many of us don't work in factories in the U.S. anymore because there's not many factories left. So it's very hard for us to contemplate working in a factory like this. You know, this is basically a sweatshop, and the closest thing that I've ever seen really to a factory quite like this, and what I've seen of the floor, like photos of the floor in Avon Climax Fuse, was the Lowell Museum, National Historic Site over in Massachusetts. They actually preserved many of the textile mills, and when you go there, they sometimes turn them on, and you can hear actually the deafening noises of those machines. I'm not too sure if fuse machines had that same issue, because they just weren't that mechanical, at least until later on. But like even when you go and so.
Was it up in Lawrence with the textile?
Yeah. So like when you look at these structures, I mean not structures, machinery. This is mostly wood, and a lot of more modern factory machinery is metal. So you have generally less of that noise. And also this is, for fuse, it's not like textiles. So, because it's more of a gradual process, because you have to be careful with fuse because you don't want to go off or have any issues. You want to make sure it's precise. This whole industry is about precision. Because if your fuse is not the proper length, if it's not made to specifications, you can actually cause someone to die because they might not know that the fuse is 5 seconds less than it is. So in that sense, that's why fuse has to be made very carefully. And you might not have a lot of these same issues as other factories, but it is basically a sweatshop though. And with 12 hours a day, people are working in this factory, and I think it's very hard for us today to really contemplate that. But yeah, this was how people lived back then.
I'm sure the conditions aren't favorable either, like climate, probably hot, probably.
Yes.
The textile factory, in one period of it, was like slavery because they worked long hours and then they had to stay on the property and stay in like a sleeping place and then work the next day. So they couldn't leave, and it was horrible.
Yeah, that's basically what this is, because as I was saying, they built tenements here. That's where these people had to live, and because they're not making enough money to live anywhere else unless you're in management and you can live in a boarding house or live with your mother, which actually they did back then. They paid the rent. Some of the family members and certain families paid money to their mothers to live around Avon. But yeah, this is not a wage that you can say is proper for any person to live. I mean, when I say people are earning $4 an hour, that's $4 an hour in today's currency. Back then, it's cents. This is not a living wage, and it's not enough to own a home. It's not enough to get out of here. They're basically creating, if anything, a debtor system for the workers.
Did they have company stores?
They had some stores. I'm not sure if they were company-owned. I know the Hadsels, they had a small news shop, and they did postcards and such, and they also sold food and things. There was, I believe there were, and that's one of the prevailing industries in Avon, I would say, would be you had some shops. Of course, this is a very small town, so there's not a lot of places to get goods. It's not like the city where, you have maybe 5 grocery stores in one block. So basically, they decide the price, and so while it's not like a company store always, it's still going to be high enough price that they're going to be putting these workers in debt to them.
They do not still make fuses with the rope and...
Oh, they do, yes.
They do.
So, as I was saying in the beginning, fireworks. Has anyone ever used fireworks before? Yeah. So, for those who haven't, or with dynamite per se, you have to have a fuse attached to that so you know how long that it will take to detonate. And with fireworks, it's unless I've never seen for any fireworks I've seen use detonation wire, but with most fireworks, they still use safety fuse, where you light the firework and basically you walk away and then it goes off, even with fountains, actually, which are legal in this state. They use safety fuse. You light it, you walk away, it goes off. It's just.
Ensign Bickford Company still makes safety.
They do not. I'm pretty sure they do not. Or if they do, it's in a very small capacity. Yes?
Did the company do anything at all for the people who died or for the survivors?
Not to my knowledge, no. It was more of an it was an outside of the company's preview to do relief. Back then, it wasn't believed to be the company's responsibility. This was a time, this is basically the Gilded Age moving into the progressive era. So you haven't seen too many reforms in that sense. And many of the relief efforts are charities, like Antoinette, Wood. Her distribution of funds was probably the biggest effort to help these workers. And actually, outside of her, I do not know anyone who did any efforts of that sort. Yes?
Do you know where most of the victims were buried?
I believe a lot of them were buried around town, or like in Avon, in East Avon Cemetery. And of course, I haven't done too much work on the genealogy, so I can't say that for all of them.
Next chapter.
Yeah, yeah, next chapter. But I do know that I know for a fact that with Albert Andrews, he was buried there. The Hadsels were buried there. And those are really the people I've focused a lot of, if any of my genealogy on, because there's a lot of information. Albert Andrews is the founder of this company, and really it's, he made it what it was, and then the Hadsels were probably the most well-known workers in this factory just because we have a written record from them, and they took photographs. Even Frank Hadsel took photographs, and I don't know if I pointed it out, but I actually have a picture of Clinton Hadsel right here. This is in his office, surrounded by his photographs. He actually took photos for newspapers and such on the side to earn an extra buck. But so these are the people I know the most, just because it's really what's left. I've tried a lot of channels to find diaries of the workers and such, but it's very hard. Not a lot of it has survived or is in the public hands. So, and many of the people, even the Hadsel family, they've moved away from Avon. I believe they live in Maine now. And yeah, it's unfortunate, but really that's how history works, I guess. Only some people are remembered just because they happen to write one thing. And that thing will basically prevail, while others who didn't take the time just kind of disappear somewhat. But yes.
Where is East Avon Cemetery?
Next to the Avon Congregational Church.
Yeah, that's near the library, right? I'm pretty sure. Or no, that's west.
Dom's Coffee Shop.
Don's Coffee. Okay.
And the cemetery is a separate association from the church. It's not belonging to the church.
Okay. Yep. Yes.
Most everybody here knows who Antoinette Wood is.
Yeah.
But for anybody who doesn't, she was an Eno, and her father gave the town this library. She gave the town Eno Memorial Hall, and they lived in what's now the 1820 house. I just thought I would mention.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Yes.
I arrived late, so I apologize if you explained where the name came from.
Oh.
The origins of the name.
I actually did not. So Now, I'm not too sure about it, but there was, so the pond that was used for this mill was called Climax Pond. I'm not sure if that came after the company, but yeah, I'm not too sure, but that would be my best guess at the moment. But its predecessor, R. Roberts and Sons, is named after Romeo Andrews, who was Albert Andrews' father, who founded Climax Fuse. Yep. Any other questions? Yes?
In 1905, did the company have any fire or property insurance?
I don't believe they did, because it seems like a lot of the reconstruction came right out of pocket. Yeah, they really didn't put any investment into this company other than buying the stocks to own it, the leadership. They even had issue with building tenements. I mean, which is a basic of any factory town, just to have your workers have housing when they're paying them basically a dime on the dollar, literally. Any other questions? Yeah. Well, thank you very much for.
I just wanted to invite everybody, we have some snacks in the back. I don't know if people haven't been here before, we published a series of 9 maps of the Farmington Canal. We have one for every town through which the canal went through, and there's the Avon and the Simsbury maps are over there on the easel. There's the map on one side, on the flip side are pictures taken of different parts of interest of the canal. So I have them in the back if anyone wants to look at them, they are for sale. Come have some fall treats. Thank you for coming, and thank you very much, Luke. That was awesome, right? That was great. Thank you. Oh, yeah, wait. I forgot. Yeah, Luke was going to talk. I did say that because Luke was.
Well, actually, I have some bad news with that project. So I guess I should talk about the broader project. Basically, so as stated prior, I received a grant from the University of Connecticut to do excavations of colonial sites around Simsbury. One of my focuses initially was the Hanover site. I don't know if many of you know about that one. There was an illegal copper works over where the high school is, basically. We did a walk-by, though, today, and it doesn't seem like there's anything left of it, unfortunately, so we're going to be moving on to different sites. Other sites on the list include Shaw's Fort in Granby, which was one of the 2 block forts in the colonial Simsbury, the town of colonial Simsbury. And another site is the possible mint for the Higley Coppers. So.
And can you tell us who you're working with?
Oh yes, I'm working with the state archaeologist on this project and the state historian. Yep, they're my mentors for this, and yeah, I've always been kind of fascinated with Simsbury history, especially since I volunteered at the Historical Society for the last 3 years. I've currently moved to Storrs, but I seek to continue to do research in this area. And I feel like this project is really great for the town because it gives us the ability to look for sites that have really been lost to history, that can really give us a lot of information about a lot of the earlier portions of Simsbury history that are either unknown or are based in legend in some cases. And yeah, so that's my goals with this. And yeah, please stay tuned. I'll be hopefully after my first dig this year and some lab work in the spring, I might be back here talking about my work again. Yeah.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.